Okay, cool. Welcome, welcome. I cannot see you. You can see me. So, yeah, building your own native app visual testing module with Appium. It's a long sentence. What I'm going to explain today here is that I'm going to guide you through all the steps and challenges I've faced, or you also might face, when you would like to develop your own module for native apps. So, yeah, today it's not about me. But you need to have some context. You might know me as a solution architect of Sauce Labs. You might know me as the blue guy from the open source community. You might have seen me during Appium conference last year in London, where I explained the journey I had with Tele2, one of my customers I was working with, on how to use Appium with React Native. Or you might have seen me during the Selenium conference in India, where I explained all the best practices I found for automating a React Native app. This talk is going to be part 3, and in comparison to movies, I hope my sequels get better each time. So yeah, let's get back to Tele2. When I was starting at Tele2, I was working in a team with multiple developers. I, as an automation geek, and we had a manual tester to do all of the comparison for layouts, animations. And even though all my functional tests were passing, my colleague found a lot of issues, and when our app grew and we got more and more features, he was kind of like stressed out, like this guy here. So I thought, why not help my colleague by removing some of his tasks and adding them into automation? So I pitched the idea to kind of like use visual regression and got some time to do the research. So I started my research, and I did that based on requirements, and I always like to do that, make a list, okay, what should it do? I sat down with the product owner, sat down with the developer, and in the end we came up with this list. In this list we said, okay, we want to have something where we can do visual regression for native apps. We were building a React Native app for iOS and for Android, so it should also be a cross-platform solution. We already used WebDriver. We already had a lot of page objects, steps, all our code was already there. So yeah, it was nice if we could integrate it also into WebDriver. If we would look to all the tools that were out there, it wouldn't be nice if we found a paid tool that we had a trial. And secondly, of last but not least, it also needed to support blockouts. And the last point about blockouts, I think I need to explain that a little bit to you. And the reason for that is that if you're creating screenshots, and you're creating screenshots, for example, for a web application, you will only get a screenshot of your viewport, or maybe the complete page, but not of your address bar, like you have with an image from Chrome, for example. But if you compare that with a screenshot on a real device, you would always get, for example, your status bar. You can get your navigation bar, and you can also get the home bar indicator on the new iPhone X and the iPad Pros. So that's something you need to take into consideration. You would like to block them out because it's not part of your app itself. On the web, you can also disable animations. On web applications, there are some functions you can just say, do not use the animations, do not use the transitions. You cannot do that with native apps unless you modify the build. So it would be nice that you can disable the animations during the comparison. And also with dynamic text, again, if you're automating a web application, you can just insert new text, make it static, and if you compare it then with each other, there will not be a difference. Well, in this case, you cannot inject new code in a native application, so yeah, we needed to be able to also block stuff out that could be dynamic. So now that we know that where we need to look for, let's do some research for existing tools. And the only limitation we gave ourselves was that it needed to support taking screenshots of and comparing screenshots for native applications. The rest of the requirements you saw before were just used during the validation of the tools. And when I started the research, it was very hard. And the reason for that is that there were not a lot of tools that would support visual regression for native apps. Almost all the tools that were out there were tools to do visual comparison on web applications. And yeah, as you see it here, you might wonder, okay, Sauce Labs just acquired a new tool, a new application. Screener, why is it not in the comparison? Well, during the comparison, the date when I did the comparison, Screener was not supporting image comparison for native applications. And I'm quite enthusiastic currently also that Screener is now part of SaaS Labs, because it shows also the part what we want to do and what we want to deliver also for our customers. And I'm really glad that we can now provide that in our continuous testing cloud. But enough about it. Let's get back also to the comparison. Based on the brands and the tools I found, I created a table. I put in all the requirements, and if you put them in the table, you get something like this. And if you would go back to kind of like the requirements we had, for example, we said we wanted to be cross-platform, then you would see that the list was already narrowed down by 3 tools. These were only or for iOS or for Android. If you would then also look for WebDriver I/O support, then Nakal would also narrow down the list. And one tool that drew my attention, first of all, was VizWiz. VizWiz was a tool that also supported image comparison for native apps. The only downside of this tool was that it did not support the blockouts. And yeah, as you might know, with the status bar, you need to be able to block it out, because your time can be different each time. So it also narrowed down the list. And last but not least, we had Applitools. And Applitools, the only thing I could say about that was there's a question mark. And the reason for that is that they're not supporting WebDriver I/O image comparison for native apps. They only support it for our web applications. But I had contacted them by then, and they said, what you can do is, for example, use a native JavaScript framework and kind of like use Appium and use that. So it costed me time to do that. I was, okay, what should I do? So in the end, you might think, what did I do? Well, I think what a lot of JavaScript developers do in the community, build it your own. And the reason for that was that the amount of effort it would take for us to kind of like investigate and make Applitools for us work was kind of like the same amount of time I needed to put in creating a new module. And this also met our requirements, because then we could use something that nicely integrated with WebDriver I/O. So when we made the decision, you might ask yourself, okay, where do you start? Well, I thought that the logic of the module should be divided into 2 parts. And I'm going to show you in the next slide. Because you have something that takes the screenshot. As you can see, we've got kind of like the module itself that nicely integrates with WebDriver I/O, and you should also have kind of like a comparison engine that could compare the screenshot for you. And what we did is also an investigation for comparison cores, for engines that could do the pixel by pixel comparison for us. And the only thing we said, okay, what we need to have is that we would find something that, first of all, was maintained actively. Secondly, we also said we do not want to have environment dependencies, meaning that if we would have a comparison core, we should be able to deploy it on our Node.js image, which we were using in our Jenkins pipeline, and there should not be any extra software on there, only something like Node.js. Third thing, it should support blockouts, like I said, and last but not least, also some compare options. It would be nice, for example, if we could enable or disable anti-aliasing during the comparison. So this resulted in the following overview. And as you can see here, this is kind of like what I also said. You see in the community that a lot of JavaScript developers like to create it by themselves. So you've got a lot of tools here that can do the image by image or the pixel by pixel comparison. So let's get back also to the requirements we had. And first of all, we said we want to have something. If we have an issue, it needs to be fixed, or we might be able to fix it ourselves with the pull request. And then already 4 items, 4 brands were off. Then we said, we also need to have the blockouts. And then you would see that pixel match and look same also narrowed the list down. So in the end, we had 3 tools. Node OpenCV, and one of the requirements was we do not want to have an extra dependency in our module for the environment. So it also narrowed the list down. And in the end, we had PixelDiff and we had Resemble.js. And PixelDiff, I've been working with PixelDiff, I think, for 1.5 years, and I had some issues with the previous module I created for web applications, and the comparison itself was not accurate enough. So in the end, I decided to go, and it was also for my previous module, I decided to go with Resemble.js. So the conclusion for us was to create something with WebDriver IO, to create something with Appium and Resemble.js. And you might be wondering, why are those images not aligned? Well, I think we miss here the most important ingredient, some blue magic. So what should the module do then? So let's get to that. Well, first of all, we should be able to create a save or to create a screenshot. And I think that will be very easy. Secondly, we should also be able to support comparing screens. We should also be able to save an element, and in the end, we should also be able to do the comparison of that element screenshot. I'm going to walk through all those points. So let's start with the save screen. I think this was the easiest thing to implement. Reason for that, yeah, with Appium, WebDriver, you can just take a screenshot. So let's get to the next one, the compare screen. And before I started coding, I wondered, where could it go wrong? Because if you would compare images, where were the steps where it could go wrong? And I think those three elements I already mentioned before, the status bar, the navigation bar, and also the home bar indicator you got at the bottom for the iPhone X series and the iPad Pro series, those are kind of like the stages where it could go wrong. And I'm going to explain you which challenges I had with those. Well, first of all, if you would look at the status bar itself, the status bar is something that's used on each platform. As you can see here, the top one is for iOS, the bottom one is for Android, and they already differ in height. But the second challenge you have here is that iOS versions itself already also differ in height, and even the Android versions differ in height. So what you want to do if you create your own module is that you've got a simple solution, something where you can say, okay, just give me the height, the width, and the position. Well, position is very easy of the status bar, but give me the height and the width of the status bar. So you can use that as a cross-platform, but also a cross-device solution. And what I always use for that is Appium Desktop. Appium Desktop, everybody knows it here, I think, will give you kind of like a visualization of the UI hierarchy of your application. And if you look at this here, you would see that I already highlighted here at the top that the status bar element can be found. You can determine the position, you can use the element rectangles from the W3C specs, and you will get back the position, the height, and the width. This is easy, but yeah, if you do a research, you also need to do a research for more phones. Here I've got a second phone, but I did a research for more iPhones, and I found out that it's very easy for iOS to determine the height and the width of the status bar. But as said, yeah, we also have Android. We need to support Android. So let's take a look here. What we see here is a Samsung S10, and as you can also see here, we've got the status bar here. So that's easy. But as said, you need to do the investigation for multiple phones. So let's take a look at, for example, a Pixel. And as you can see here, we don't have a status bar element here. We don't have a navigation bar element here. And I think I have my first challenge here. How should I create a cross-platform solution for at least iOS and Android, but also across device, because they can differ also in height. We're thinking, okay, I can use kind of like a static data block, but yeah, because they can differ in height, I think that was not the best solution. So the following research costed me some precious minutes of my life. I needed to check what the difference was in building up the UI hierarchy between XUI test driver and between the Android UI Automator 2 driver. And during my research, I stumbled upon the settings API. And I don't know if anybody knows this one, but with this API, you can specify the behavior of the Appium server itself during the session you're on. And for example, on Android UI Automator 2, it runs faster because of the setting ignore unimportant views. And it means that it will ignore some elements in the view hierarchy which it deems irrelevant. But this behavior can be changed during the test with the settings API. And if you would go to the page of the settings API in the Appium documentation, you will find that XUI test and also Android UI Automator 2, they have specific settings to manipulate the behavior. Keep in mind that they do not have the same settings. Just keep it in the back of your mind. But let's get back to Android. And I don't know if you've seen the new version of Appium Desktop, the latest one. I'm going to show you. And maybe you can see the enormous change we have here in comparison to the old version. No? Okay, I'm going to highlight it. We now got the Action tab. And with the Action tab, we have the possibility to use the Settings API when we're on our visualization of the app. And I'm going to show you how to use it, because I can use it in my module, but it might also be useful for you during your automation when you want to find an element that's not there for Android. So let's get into the demo. If you would click on the action, you will get a new screen, and here you can select which action you want to execute. First of all, where you want to execute it. Do you want to execute it on the device or on the session? And you can also select what we need, the setting. Well, the issue I had, I was not seeing any elements, and in the action or in the settings API, you will find there's an option, and I hope you can read it. It's called Allow Invisible Elements. And basically, the elements are not there, and if you put it in adjacent, post it, and set it to true, and then post it, that's, I think, better, then it will update your settings on the Appium server. The only thing you need to do then is go back to the screen, go back to the source tab, and refresh your source code. And if you would do it then, you will get this. And as you can see now, we have the status bar here, and we have the navigation bar here. Awesome. But as said, if you're doing a research, don't rely on one phone. Let's also check the Samsung. And I don't know if you see some difference between the first Samsung screenshot I've shown you and this one. The first one, we already had the navigation or the status bar, but now we also have the navigation bar. And now we have a cross-platform and a cross-device solution on how to determine the rectangles of the navigation and of the status bar. So that brings us also to the next subject, the toolbar, the navigation bar of Android. And yeah, we also want a cross-device solution here. And as you can see here on the screen, we've got differences in this, the toolbar itself, the navigation bar itself, and you can also have a device that does not have a navigation bar. For example, this is a screenshot of a Samsung S10 where you have physical buttons. Well, physical, but there are buttons on your screen. So also here we want to have the cross-device solution. And again, if we go back with the settings API, we now have that solution to determine the height, the width, and also the position. Because here it's really important that we know which position the screen, the toolbar starts. So now we found a way to automate and to get the position of the status bar and the toolbar. We only got one thing left, and that's the home bar indicator we have on iOS, iPhone X series. You can see it here. And currently we have two sizes. During my investigation, we did not have the iPad Pro, the latest one, with the home bar. But when I did research, we had two phones. We had the iPhone X and we had the iPhone X Max, as you can see at the bottom. And this behavior can influence also image comparison. Because, for example, if you're using Netflix or if you're using YouTube and you're turning your screen, you're going from portrait to landscape mode, and you're watching, you would see that the home bar indicator would kind of like fade away. And you do not want that to interfere when you do the image comparison. So you need to know the position of the home bar indicator. So let's dive into that part now. And again, we're using Appium Desktop here to see if we can find the element in the UI hierarchy. But I think we have our second challenge here. It's not in the UI hierarchy. And I think the third challenge was, there's no setting in the settings API here to determine the position, the height, and the width of the home bar indicator. And the only thing I could do here is, I was glad that I was using Apple because I only had two devices. If this was happening on Android, I had a problem. With Apple, it's quite easy to determine if it's an iPhone X or if it's an iPhone X Max series based on the resolution of the screen. So I used that to create kind of like a static data block for the position of the home bar indicator for an iPhone X, the regular, and for a Max series. So now we know how to fix those things and how to provide that for our module. Let's take a look at the second method we need to create. It's kind of like the save element. And we got multiple options here. If you would look at the W3C specs, pasted it in here and made a screenshot for you, you would see that you first of all have your take screenshot, but you also have an option to create a screenshot of an element. If you just provide the element ID, then it will return a screenshot of the element itself, a smaller screenshot. So this is awesome. But if you want to use this and want to create a module, you also need to think about what if people are using an older version of Appium that does not support the W3C spec, or if we want to do more. We need to have a solution for that. And I think the solution itself was also simple. Because like we already do, we can determine the height, the width, and the position of the status bar. We can do the same with an element. And if we would just create a screenshot and use the get element rectangles, we can kind of like crop it from the complete screenshot. That makes it easier to create the screenshot. And if you do that, you have some extra powers. Powers like, if you have a screenshot, just provide a positive margin, making it bigger, or provide a negative margin, making a smaller element screenshot. So you have something extra here in comparison to the method for just creating a screenshot. So that's what I've also implemented here. Then, last but not least, we need to do a comparison. And comparison also for the elements itself. And I think we already dealt with a lot of stuff for comparing screenshots itself. So that's not that difficult here. I think the only difficult part here, if you're creating large element screenshots, like for example you see here with the login form, it's harder to determine position of elements in this typical screenshot. It's doable, but then you need to do a lot of calculation, and yeah, if you're building something, you need to do a lot of calculation. It could cause flakiness. So in my case, I decided not to do it. If you want to have it another way, just create a smaller screenshot or use the negative margins. But now we have all the elements, now we have all the methods we can use. We only need to have the output. And I now want to go back to Tele2. I want to go back and use them as a showcase or a use case also for what I've done and implementing it within the organization. And it came when we were migrating from React Native 54 to 57, and normally if you would see these version numbers, you were like, okay, there are only some small fixes, some bug fixes if they're using proper SEM versioning, but there were a lot of changes in the code. When I ran my functional tests, everything was passing. But as I said in the beginning, my colleague, even though my functional tests were passing, he always found some layout issues. So I thought, well, let's take this screen and just see if there's a difference in it. And as you can see here, there is a difference. And the difference was in the indentation. So my module was already providing some proof that there was a difference, even though my tests were passing. So I ran it on the complete suite, on the complete app, and we saw that we have multiple issues. We lost some rounding, some corners. We had indentation issues. We had font issues. And even in a relogin form, we found an issue that you would normally not find. As you can see here, the exclamation mark, it just shows the last character of my password. So this is very awesome, I think, if you can use this. But there's also a but. And I call it a disclaimer. The module, it also, even though I made it, it's always perfect if you made it yourself, but there are some cons. And one of the cons, if you would use this, is it's a basic comparison. If you compare it to other tools, they have a better comparison engine. This is just a basic pixel by pixel engine comparison method. It also has some impact on your project size. And the reason for that is that you need to store your data, your screenshots somewhere. You have a screenshot of an element. If you want to do it on multiple devices, you do that on your iPhone. There you have a screenshot. You do it on Android device, and you have multiple screenshots. So the repository size will grow. As said, you might have some limitation also on the blockout options. And last but not least, and I think that's one thing I really miss, is that you do not have a dashboard. Within a dashboard, you have a clear overview for your image comparison where you can ignore elements with a drag and drop, for example. Or where you can say just have a bounding box and say this is the area you just need to compare. But as said, you create it yourself, you need to say something positive also about your module. Well, first of all, it's open source. You can use it. It's free. And if you want to buy me a coffee or a beer, you can do that later to thank me. But you can just use it. You can just implement this within WebDriver IO. The logic itself, if you think about it, what you need to do, it's quite, between quotes, easy to use. And I think if I would compare something, the comparison between my module and a dashboard is that normally what I like to see, if I execute a test case, that I see what I'm doing in that test case. And I've got an example here. What you can see here is that I'm naming my test case compare screen element blockouts. I'm providing some element blockouts, and I can easily see now in my code what I'm doing in comparison to a dashboard. There you do a lot of magic, but you're not seeing it in your own code. So those are kind of like the pros I thought of my module. So I hope now you have a very good impression about what you need to do or what you might not want to do if you need to create something like this. I also showed you that even that you might not see elements during your automation, especially on Android, you can just use the settings API to get some elements back on the screen. And yeah, if you want to know more about how the module works, the address is there. Just released a new version this morning with some fixes. And one of the fixes is that, for example, you now have a better blockout option. Everything is green now, but you can now see, instead of it's fully black, you can now see what you're blocking out. All the differences are easy now to spot for yourself. Yeah, if you have any questions also about it, fire. That was it, sorry.
Does anyone have questions? Oh, we got one.
Do you suggest any for web open source visual testing with the combination of BDD and WebDriver IO?
Yeah, there are a lot of tools out there in the market. I think then it's best to go back to the list I had here with the pros and the cons. Because you can use a lot of tools. And even if you're using Sauce Labs, you can use Screener IO. But you also need to look at what you want to use, what you want to do with your image comparison. And if you would use open source tools, as said, there are some limitations. So if you're going to explore the market, just create a list, a wish list for yourself, what you would like to have, or a requirement list, what it should do. And yeah, keep these in mind. I cannot tell you this is the best tool in the market. Yeah, maybe my module, but I think it's very hard to say what the best tool for you is in the market.
Does this support BDD?
BDD is just, as we say, we call it, it's syntactical sugar right. On your test cases. But if you're using WebDriver IO, there are multiple plugins to use to do the image comparison. It's not connected to BDD itself.
Okay, thank you.
Hold on one second.
So I know this is for mobile image comparison, but do we have for desktop image comparison?
Yeah, you have it also for desktop. And I'm going to promote my own modules also. If you're using WebDriver IO, I just created a new beta version of the image comparison for version 5. And it's out there, you can use it. If you go to my GitHub page, there's an installation instruction. Be aware of the fact it's currently in beta. And if you find some issues, please notify me and I can help you with that.
Thank you.
Is this a WebDriver IO service, or does it have WebDriver IO as a dependency in itself?
It's a WebDriver IO service. So just basically add it to the service array, provide the data you need for setting, for example, your base path or your baseline, to set a path where you're going to store the temporary images and some extra options you've got. So yeah, you can just use it and implement it as a service.
Thanks.
All right. Oh, wait, we got one more.
Hi, I'm Wayne. Can this be integrated with Source Lab?
Yeah, if you, for example, if you're using WebDriver I/O, you can run it on whatever machine you want. You can run it on your local machine, but you can also use it with Sauce Labs. Basically, what we're doing here, we're connecting to WebDriver I/O itself, and if WebDriver I/O is connecting to Sauce Labs, it will take a screenshot in Sauce Labs and do all the calculation back on your machine, or on your Jenkins instance or Bamboo instance.
Do you have any example, like how to use your code, like on Ruby or Cucumber, those kind of stuff?
No, because this is specifically for WebDriver I/O, this module.
Okay.
Do you store these in some YouTube channels next week?
The movie?
Yeah,
Me?
like, the videos and stuff.
The videos,
like what
yeah. Sauce Labs will send an email out, I think, a notification next week or something, that it's on YouTube.
And even the yesterday's workshop PDFs and stuff, do you have any?
The workshops of yesterday are on the USB drive you got, and even the presentations are on there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Issues when we have a sticky header on our website, like when we try to scroll down, the sticky header travels along with the page, and so when we try to do an image comparison, it doesn't work well. So is there a way to go around it, like keep the sticky header only on the top and just take a screenshot of the page alone?
Depends on the module you're using, and it depends on the CSS magic you can do yourself. Because you're able kind of like just to inject some data, some JavaScript into your browser and tell this specific element just to be on that location all the time. So it kind of like sticks your sticky header just to the top, and if you scroll, it will also go to the top. But it's possible.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, our next talk is at 2:40, so you guys have a little time. And go find Wim if you have more questions.